Hello, everyone. 2026. We've made it. First off, a big happy new year to everyone out there. 2025 brought some tough challenges for cyber defenders, and I'm sure 2026 will be no different. But here on Blueprint, we had our biggest year ever with thousands of you tuning in across the globe. And with the shift in style, I've had a ton of fun making new episodes. Even with course updates and other things taking my time, it still did take me a bit longer to get some episodes out that I wanted. I know many of you are hungry for more, so no worries. I will continue to get episodes out as fast as I can. Blueprint is not going anywhere. I've got years of gas in the tank and look forward to making episodes long into the future, so keep those feeds refreshed because a new episode may pop up at any time. Okay, on to the very first episode of 2026, and I'll tell you what. You are really in for a treat here because this one is a doozy and perhaps one of my favorite episodes we've ever had because it is absolutely stuffed with real details from an actual incident and how you can make sure this isn't happening in your org. So strap in and get ready for some hardcore detection opportunities over the next 90 minutes. Yes, this is an extra long episode and I promise you it is worth it. So what are we talking about today? Well, we've all heard stories about fake IT workers getting jobs at organizations around the world and using their insider access to try to steal documents and ultimately deliver malware or even ransomware to the environment. Talking about it in class, every course I have taught in 2025 has had multiple people that have encountered these attempts. So if you're listening to this, your org has likely already seen it, will see it, or you missed it and it's already happening in your environment right now and you just don't know about it. But what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to kick off 2026 with a major initiative to sweep and clean our orgs of this threat and make a difference right off the bat. How are we going to do that? Well, what I'm bringing you here is a Blueprint exclusive, and to my knowledge, one of the deepest dives publicly available on the tactics used by these groups. You're going to hear about the nitty-gritty details on how an organization realized they were infiltrated by not one, but multiple fake workers at the same time. You're going to know about the tactics they used, how the SOC found them, took apart their operation in detail, and how you can do the same thing on your network. What we're going to do here is give you the ammunition needed to kick off a major threat hunting operation for this in your environment or your customers' environments, and this episode is going to give you so many ideas on how to do it. Seriously, if you don't have something to take notes sitting near you right now, I want you to pause the episode and get something to write ideas down. Everyone needs to listen to this episode very closely with a pen and paper and write down how you're going to do this, because I'll tell you right now before we get started, there are so many actionable detection opportunities you're about to hear about, and I don't want you to miss any of them because you never know which one is the one that's going to work. Okay, no more delay, because what you're about to hear is the longest episode of Blueprint we've ever put out, and without a doubt, also one of the most awesome. A huge thank you to Zak Stufflebeam for doing back-to-back episodes and for bringing this story to the Blueprint audience. If after hearing it, you have something similar you'd like to share as well so we can all learn from what you've experienced, please contact me. You can do that through LinkedIn, through the feedback form in the podcast notes, as long as you leave your contact details. And if you do, I will get in touch. Okay, let's go. In this episode of Blueprint, how to find fake IT workers in your environment with repeat guest Zak Stufflebeam.
I'm Zak Stufflebeam. I own Spartan Cyber Consulting, and I'm a content creator as well. This is a story I ran into while working with a company, and I did an incident response for them. And so we're going to go through that and have some of the interesting facts about that. So basically, we're going to start from day one. So the day one, what happens is, and this is before I was brought in, but day one, the SOC gets an alert, and this is your typical alert. Your typical alert comes in. Hey, someone tried to download a remote management tool. This is what you see with, a lot of scams, a lot of, low-level hackers are trying to get you to download, this remote management tool, let you in, be a fake help desk. Scattered Spider was one of the big threats at the time. So the company automatically kind of assumed like, hey, this might be Scattered Spider because they were all in the news. And so the company kind of dug in a little bit. And they started to notice that, like, oh, they tried to download it, but it didn't execute. It was downloaded, but the EDR stopped it from actually executing. So they thought, okay, that's good. The SOC assumed when they'd reach out to the user to verify, the user's going to say, I didn't know that happened, or I was trying to call help desk. Your typical, they see these alerts. And so funny enough, they actually reached out to the user. They said, hey, we noticed you download this. What's going on? And their response raised the hairs on their neck, which was interesting. The response was, this is not a breach. I tried to open Teams and it went awry. Well, luckily, because I don't know every SOC, but I do know I've worked in some SOCs where some people would go, okay, good enough, and close it. Luckily, this analyst did not. This analyst said, this is weird, and reached out to the manager. The manager said, yeah, that's pretty odd. Let's hop on a call with the person. So they hopped on a call face to face, and when they did that, they interviewed them, and the interview, just something didn't sit right with that manager. The manager said they are acting weird. They are in a technical role. They were in a sort of like a pseudo development role, so they should have known at least a little IT. And the way they were talking was like they didn't even understand how Teams work. They didn't know how to open their computer, like just like basic IT stuff. And so the manager was like, okay, that doesn't align with what your job is, and that's weird. So then, anyway, they report this to upper management, and upper management's like, well, we can't fire someone based on suspicion. So how sure are you that this wasn't like they accidentally had a Google ad or something like that? So the analysts in the SOC actually do a full investigation, and they prove through DNS logs the person was going to Google. Then they went to one remote management tool, and then it blocked it. Then went to Google, went to remote management tool, blocked it. And they kept doing that until they found the one that didn't get blocked. Then they proved it was on that machine, right? So then they said, hey, does anyone have access to your machine besides you? That person said, absolutely not. I live alone. I don't, the whole thing. I said, okay, so now you just proved it has to be you. And so then they present them with it. It had to be you. This is what we got. Person vehemently denies it. Don't know anything about it. They're acting suspicious, the whole thing. Their manager actually, funny enough, went to bat for him and said, I trust them fully. I trust them. Like, they wouldn't do this. We thought, this isn't the hill you want to die on because we can prove this, right? So let's just not do this. Like, don't put your name out there too much. And so, funny enough, they ended up letting them go just based on the fact they didn't, even if you did it, they thought maybe they did it and they're like embarrassed. So they're like too scared. They're going to get in trouble. So they don't want to admit it. And so they thought, okay, well, we'll let them go just based on the fact we don't trust this person anymore. Even if they're not malicious, we don't trust them. And which in my opinion was the right call. Well, then they repost the job, right? They have to open it up. They had multiple job openings, so they actually had a backfill already posted. And this is where it gets interesting. The person reapplies for their own job. What? And when they reapply, and I'll say the name was very unique, so it wasn't like you wouldn't have caught it. They reapply, but their resume is completely different. It's a totally separate resume. It's the same resume in some cases, but the experience is totally different companies, totally different years and all that stuff. Same name, same address, same email, same phone number. So then they reach out to the SOC and they're like, hey, we have no idea what's going on. Like, this, why would someone reapply for their own job? Well, then they realize, okay, something is a little bit bigger than what we think. Like, this is odd. And so this is when they, call us and bring us in as incident response, because they're trying to figure out, we need a deeper dive into this and we need to find out what's going on. So right away, when they kind of told me what was going on, I had suspicion that I thought it might be something like the DPRK IT scam, but I also, because this was not, this was an American. They spoke perfect English. They lived in America. So that kind of made it uncertain as to where we're at. Is this scattered spider trying to get in? What was going on? So we looked at the resumes, and funny enough, they said, okay, well, what do you need to start breaking this down? I said, well, first thing, we need to define the scope. So we said, let's define the scope. And the scope we defined was all IT people with privileged access hired in the last 6 months. Let's start there. So we start there, and then we said, okay, I said I need all the resumes, applications. I need all the questions they answered, like, have you all the things you answer when you apply for a job. I said, then I'm going to need, if you can provide it, right? This is after our NDA and stuff. Then I need to provide all their elected benefits, because, if it is the DPRK IT scam, the first thing they're going to do is elect out of insurance and everything, right? They don't need insurance if they're scamming you. So we did that, pulled them all, and immediately as I started looking at these, I contacted the company. I was like, you guys might be in bigger trouble than you think, because I started to look at these and there were resumes identical to each other of people. I mean, you have the two exact same resumes. And some of them, it's funny because, this started as, this should have been caught by HR as an HR issue type deal. But it was funny because the way we caught it, initially anyway, with the resumes and stuff, was because we had technical background. And so that doesn't seem to make sense at first, but we started to notice patterns like double asterisks next to words that other resumes have boldened. And we're like, oh, that's markdown language that didn't get properly rendered, right? So we're starting to see that, like, oh, they're actually boldening the same words on these resumes, but you didn't notice it because they're highlighted differently. And so we started to see that and know, okay, this is probably AI generated, right? So then we noticed that. Then we start looking at patterns. Okay, so what patterns are there? Well, all the emails are first name, last name, 3 numbers at gmail.com, right? So, okay, we're starting to notice that. We start going back and we're like, okay, all these people did background checks, right? And they're like, yep, I did background checks. So the company actually does third-party background checks. And so we said, you need to reach out to the third party and figure out, how did they validate this? Well, funny enough, the third party says every one of them that you found so far, and at this point we'd only found like 3 or 4 because we just went off of the exact copies of resumes and stuff. And they said they've all failed the background checks, but when they fail one automatically, because there's times where like they would reach out to a school or something, right? If you went to this school that no longer is in business, they would say, hey, that school never replied. We never got a response. Can you provide documentation? And so they were using fraud documents. So they were stealing identities and using fraud documents. So funny enough, we said, okay, what is I can't remember the exact wording we used, but we said, what is the actual like statistic you have around how many were failing before? And they said, I think in 2 years, like 1 had ever failed a verification check and needed manual upload. And I said, and you saw 3 in a month and didn't think, hey, that's weird. So we're like, okay, there's another lesson learned. Don't implicitly trust your third-party background checkers. So then we said, okay, we found some of these indicators, right? The resumes. We talked to the managers of the people that we found as suspicious. And then one thing the company did that I actually think hindered us later on is they actually put them on temporary suspension at that time until we could finish the investigation. The reason that hindered us is because they did exactly what any normal scam would do. They turned off their machine and never turned it back on, right? So they said, we're not letting you get this
Which
data.
is highly suspicious right from the start.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course. Yep.
So we're like, okay, well, that sucks. Which we're pretty confident that they were suspicious, but we want to make sure. So one thing that we started doing was pulling the logs that we had and all that stuff, and trying to track down, like, what are they doing, right? Because at this point we didn't know, are they trying to get money from us? Are they trying to steal data? What's going on, right? And then we asked the company, one of the big things is like, we started to see logs like, they were using screen recording software. They were using, they were across the board using AI, like extremely heavy. The other thing that we noticed right away was like, they weren't working. They were only working a couple hours a day, maybe. Like they were working like 2-3 hours a day. And a lot of times it was 8-9 p.m. That's not their normal work hours, right? So we're like, how does no one catch this? That was the first kind of thought in our head, right? Is how does anyone catch this? So we're like a week into this thing and we're starting to track it down. We found 4 or 5 at this point with the resumes and the background checks and stuff. And then we said, okay, let's focus on these guys, find indicators that we can then use to spread this investigation. And some of the indicators were your typical indicators, right? Other people were trying to download remote software. So we created a detection rule for them that would find that remote software, that would find one of them or a couple of them were using Pastebin, which is your typical exfil. So we're like, okay, how many people at this company use Pastebin? Not very many. So let's start tracking those logs.
Ones.
Yeah, exactly. So we're like, let's start tracking that. And so that gave us, just based on like little indicators here and there, that gave us a bigger group of people. But then obviously, that expanded our group to quite a bit. At this point, it was like 25, 30, something like that. And we knew there's probably not 30 in here, but we need to, some people probably went to Pastebin once and that brought them in, so we need to get them out. So we went to the ones that we knew for a fact were suspicious, which was the original. And we said, deep investigate this person and let's find every indicator we can find that we know they're using, and let's spread this to look for the other indicators. And this is where we really started noticing that, the speed of which companies go, and, the prioritization over availability versus security starts to come in, because we started noticing, we asked for all their IT tickets, stuff like that. Like, we started noticing there were signs, right? The very first user called in at one point and said, "Hey, I can't connect to the VPN. It's not working." And the help desk even said, "Well, let me log into your machine and figure out what I can do." And they found there was another VPN running. Well, that wouldn't make sense on a corporate machine, right? Why do you have a VPN that's not ours and a VPN that is? So
Yeah, that should
that
have
should
been a
have been
ticket right
reported.
away.
Yeah, that should have been reported. But we noticed, hey, that's just a training issue. The help desk has no idea that if someone has a VPN, that's weird, because they probably were told, just fix our VPN or whatever. So they told them, you need to remove your VPN. That's it. Remove that one, and then you'll be able to connect. So we're like, okay, so there's tickets there. We noticed another one they had for a ticket was something along the lines of just their computer just going crazy. And that was right when we said, hey, you have a security incident. They said they're open Teams or whatever, and it just like went awry. They have no idea what was going on, and da. And so we're like, okay. So we started taking those indicators. One of the big ones we found was their AI usage. This company did a really good job about actually monitoring AI. So they had their approved AI, and they had non-approved AI. And the approved AI, everybody in IT pretty much had access to the approved Gen AI, so they could chat with it, whatever. Which makes sense for development and all this, which is all these were developers at this point. So we noticed they're using AI heavily. Developers use AI heavily, but we started tracking down some of the sites they were using. They were using like, I have a list of them because I don't use them, but a lot of them were like the AI to make it seem, or make language seem more human, make AI translations, basically how to hide AI written documents and stuff like that. So we started noticing that really quickly. We noticed tools like Decopy, Phrasely, Verve Copilot, and Meeting AI, which Meeting AI was the real one where we're like, ooh, that's bad, because anyone that knows Meeting AI, it actually can sit in a meeting for you and take notes and do the whole thing. So we're like, we don't even know if these people were in the meetings with you when you think they were. So we kind of said, okay, we've got these 30 people. Can we reach out to all their leaders and just ask, can anyone tell us any suspicious activity that they've had? And we gave them a list of indicators that we found, which was like audio, video being laggy at times, not being able to make meetings, and, we're not talking about like a one-off. We're saying consistently. We noticed some people actually at times were asking for like, hey, can I work tonight because I got sick this afternoon or something. So we asked for weird activity like that. Never turning your virtual background off. We noticed that because what we started to do is this was a pretty fun one. We actually set up an interview with the person that was fired because they reapplied for the job. So we set up an interview, and I interviewed them to see if they would actually, and we noticed the very first thing is because we wanted to interview them with someone they didn't know, because we assumed they automated this process, right? They're automating the applications. And so one thing we noticed is when they turn their background off, because we were looking for kind of ways we can figure this out. And so we said, can you turn your virtual background off? And they finally did. And we noticed they had behind them was a piece of wood with like a sheet. And so what it was, and we only know this because then as we were talking and stuff, we noticed like an arm come into the screen. They were so close to other people that they actually were like talking over each other, bringing their arms in and stuff. And what it was is it's a huge call center. And we noticed this because we started to make other people take their virtual backgrounds off. And it's a call center where they're all working together. Right.
You see the same background when you have multiple people?
We saw it on a couple. It wasn't,
wow.
it wasn't like every one of them. Yeah. Wow. So we saw some of them working in shared locations as well. Like we noticed like some of them were in like large break rooms and stuff like that rather than a home, which is kind of odd. But so we started to notice this. And so we said, okay, there's another indicator, right? If we make everyone turn their virtual background off, at least it won't work perfectly, but at least we'll start to go, okay, that's a little weird, right? So we gave all the managers this information, said, can you narrow this down to who you think we should really be paying attention to? Yeah. They came back with, I think it was like 18 or 20. So we said, okay, we've got it down to at least them. And so we looked for something that we knew they all did, right? We were looking for that pattern. And we started to track their AI activity. We noticed the weird sites and stuff like that. But AI at this time, I mean, just like it is now, it was big in the news. So AI was good to use, like as far as DNS and stuff. But we were noticing that we're still getting a bunch of hits because everybody in the company is trying these new AIs and all this stuff. So we said, okay, let's focus on the AI that the company uses, the approved AI. And luckily, this company was a little bit forward thinking in AI, and they actually were ingesting all of their AI prompt chats into their SIM. So we actually could just search directly for the prompts and see for keywords. So we said, okay, pull all the history of these people that we know are confirmed. And when we did that, we noticed a very strict pattern. Every morning, they gave it a script, and that script said, basically, hey, I have to do my daily check-in based on all the information I've given you today, because what they were doing is they were actually only using AI for work. They weren't working at all. So they were using all their chats were going in there saying, hey, here's my day my work for the day, blah, blah, blah. Give me this, give me this, give me this. And then at the end of the day, they'd say, or at the morning, they'd say, based on all that work that I gave you, can you give me a report for my manager? Can you make it sound English? Can you make it sound human? Can you take or add, add cadence breaks, add like ums and thes and ahs. And it was a really long script. It was like a whole page script that they were giving it. And we noticed they were giving it to the every day to report this to the manager.
This was like a literal script they were reading in a one-on-one or something like that.
No, it wasn't a script like that. It was a script that they were presenting to ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT would give them the script back, or give them, the response back, and that would be their daily summary. Then they would read that word for word to the manager each day.
It's so crazy.
Yeah.
The one question I had, but before we continue on from there, just back to the interview thing for a second.
Yeah.
Whether this was the original interview or after people had talked with them, just to confirm, this was someone that when you were on a video call with them, they weren't initially looking like a deep fake, right? They turned off their background and they appeared to be like an American that spoke completely normal English without an accent or anything like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
they were 100%.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So these are conceivably Americans, but sitting in a shared location.
Yeah.
Doing this.
It was very odd because
wow.
it was a very mixed bag. So we would identify a lot of people that were seemingly Asian, and then there would be like a complete American in there as well that spoke perfect English. And you're like, okay, so that, because we thought that too, like, is this like a common pattern? Are they sitting in the same place, whatever? So it was very weird. We looked at their geolocations as well, and a lot of them were kind of all over the place, but we did notice there was a good amount of them in, I say this, there was a good amount of them that applied with the guys that they lived in, I think North Carolina or something like that. They didn't actually live there.
They claimed geolocation or like IP based or what?
No, that was all their addresses when they were like applying. But then most of them were in Texas, geo IP. Now, we know that they were using VPN chaining, so we take that with a grain of salt. Sure. We don't know, obviously, but a lot of them were in Texas. So at least that's where their geolocation was. Yeah. I don't know where they actually were. But
one other question on one of the other things. You had mentioned you looked at the answers for interview questions. Mm-hmm. Is that because the interview process is like you're doing the same questions, you're writing down answers as people are answering it? And you had mentioned that, but you didn't say, like, did you find the same answers to the same questions?
I'm glad you brought it up. There's a ton of data in this, so I'm trying not to miss stuff, but also there's just so much. So yeah, good point. So one of the things we looked at is during the interviews, right, there'd be like a spot where the manager puts feedback, right? So like, here's a question, and then here's like the feedback. And that was what we looked for. And that actually, funny enough, was a big source of data, because what we found is every one of them had some indicators where because they would get interviewed, 2, 3, 4 times, whatever, depends on the process. But one of the things we noticed is, like, right off the bat, the first person that would interview him would be like, yeah, I think they're very technical, very skilled. I think they might struggle to fit because their, audio cuts out a lot and they seem odd. Like, they seem like they wouldn't, like, they were trying to be nice about it, but they would say, like, maybe not a cultural fit or something like that. And then, like, the next one would be like, seems extremely technical, but whenever I ask personal questions, they wouldn't respond and stuff like that. And so you're like, okay, these are all red flags, but it's weird that you move them on. And so what we found was, right, like, in this company, clearly, and this just comes with, any companies of size, like, speed wins. And so what was happening is they were probably needing people, interviewing, moving them to the next stage, and then that next person was going in with a fresh slate. They weren't reading the feedback from the person before. They were just going in and just ignoring it, right?
Yeah, interesting.
And so we noticed that right about off the bat, all of them had some sort of red flag in their interview questions and stuff that, like, hey, this, you should have dug into this a little more, or you should have done this.
Yeah.
And all of that came with our lessons learned that we reported. So once we got this down to, like, we had pretty certain, 10 to 20 that we knew for a fact are probably here, right? We reached out to the FBI. We started working with them. And we said, hey, give us everything you have on, this, because we gave them, at this point, we had, hundreds of IPs and stuff like that to give them, which all of those came back to, hey, this is the DPRK, which is Democratic People's Republic of Korea, excuse me. And so it was North Korea. Obviously, you can never 100% confirm that, but the indicators all pointed to that. So we said, okay, at least we now know kind of what we're dealing with. The concerning part here at this point, once we figured this out, because we knew, we were pretty certain that's what it was, but until the FBI said, yeah, all of those are attributed to them, we were like, okay, now we know what we're dealing with. The problem with this, and this is where this came as a really tough decision for the management and for us, right, is what do you do now? Because do you risk starting to, you have some people that are already on temporary suspension. They're starting to ask questions, right? Then you have some people that are working, but if you put them on temporary suspension, you're going to notify everybody else that you don't know how many are here. So
typical watch and learn decision, right?
So
it's like, do we cut it or
exactly
learn?
So it was a very interesting one, because it was like, what do you do? And so luckily the management actually trusted us enough. They said, what do you think? And I said, give us 1 day, let them work. Give us 1 day to try to get, because what we wanted to get a full forensic of their computer, right? We wanted to get that live image of it. But how do we do that without notifying them, right? Because they were remote, so they're just going to never give us that computer back. So we came up with a pretty good social engineering scheme, if you will. So one thing we noticed is all of them, almost immediately when they got hired, were starting to request, we need more access, we need this, we need that, right? Like, and luckily there's a handful of them that were new enough that it just hadn't got through yet. So, like, they probably would have got the access, but they just weren't. They were like, oh, you're still new, we won't give you access to prod until this, like, so we're at this point, like, they weren't there long enough. And so, interestingly enough, what we found was one person who was, we were almost 100% certain about this person, that they were suspicious. We said, okay, this person just put a ticket in, like, I think it was like 2 or 3 hours ago, to request, they said they didn't have access to something. Well, we knew a normal IT person would know that this is, BS. This is not real, what we're about to say. But we've noticed they aren't very technical as they claim to be. And so we said, okay, we're going to reach out to these people and we're going to say, hey, we want to give you this access. We don't know why it's not working. You should have access. So can we run a diagnostic on your machine? They said, yeah, absolutely. Well, we said, okay, it might take a little bit. Well, then we ran 'em, or then we went to all their machines and we did it quickly. Because we had already transferred the tool there to their machine because we could transfer tools, but we knew as soon as we run it, they're gonna know because it's either gonna stop their machine to a crawl or it's gonna pop up or something. So we got on call with them. We pretended we're help desk, and basically we ran Velociraptor on all their machines. So we pull that image, we look at it, and thank goodness we did because we got so much more data. Because the company had DNS logs, right? But the DNS would be like, oh, they went to Google, or oh, they went to, but when you pull the data from the machine, right, we're getting the full GET request. So what we noticed is, first thing that was very interesting to me, this is something I learned, and I've been doing cyber for a long time, is I never even thought about it, but if you use Google Translate, pretty much all the entire parameter is in a GET request, not a post. So we actually could translate everything they were doing back. And so that was really interesting because what we noticed is at first we thought, okay, these are people, like you said, that are Americans speaking English, etc. And these people are just, that's what makes it hard to detect. But what we found is most of them didn't actually speak any English. I mean, to the point where they would have to translate even our onboarding documentation and everything. So they literally couldn't read English, at least at all. And we found recordings of calls because I don't know if this must be part of their own procedures, but they recorded almost everything, and it was right on their machine. So we could see all their meetings. Like, they recorded a ton of stuff. What we found is we also found them on calls with third-party developers from like Fiverr.com that they were hiring to do the work. So they were actually outsourcing their own work. And so we saw the recordings of those calls where they're explaining what they need done. And all of that was in Mandarin. So we're like, okay, this is odd because you said it was DPRK. Well, then we talked to FBI. The FBI is like, it's very common in the DPRK. Mandarin is a second language. They send all their IT people trained in China. So we're like, okay, that makes sense. So the Mandarin thing was very interesting because once we knew that, it became easier. This was a US-based company. None of them worked in China or with China. So now let's look for anything in Mandarin, Chinese. We started doing like any law or any queries for anything to Google Translate with Mandarin as the variable. So we started to identify them pretty quick at this point, right? We're tracking them down pretty well. And the AI allowed us to actually build the case of, because one of the fears, right, for the company is, what if we fire the wrong guy or girl, right? And then they sue us for wrongful termination. So one of the things we did is we could prove, like, even if this person is not associated with this group, we can prove you can't do your job because we have your AI logs and you're using AI to do the entirety of the job and to even translate what your manager's saying to you. So you obviously can't do this job. So worst case, we at least covered your bases there. You're not going to get, if they try to sue you, you have reason to terminate, right? Then with the forensics image, we started pulling, we noticed they had even scripts on their machine that would move the mouse, right? So that it looked like activity, stuff like that, which we've seen that before, but this was just interesting because I don't know if they even knew it, but the company wasn't tracking their activity like to that level, right? They're not tracking
But that's how no one noticed that they like weren't active,
exactly,
except for the weird hours. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was interesting. As we went back, we noticed then too that we got the FBI's list of indicators, so we started comparing, right? What do we find that's like that? And one of the things we found is most of them rerouted their machines, which is a known indicator. So as soon as they got hired, we would ship the laptop to them, right? Well, as soon as they get the laptop in transit, they would call and get it rerouted to a new address. So that was one of the indicators that were like, okay, that's pretty easy to detect. But then, funny enough, I started looking at the emails because we got access to all their Teams chats, all their emails, everything. And funny enough, we looked at the emails of the delivery, and half the time the delivery of the laptop it has a signature down there, right? It's signed by somebody else. So it's a totally different name, like, because they would make you print and then sign your name. And so it was a totally different name. And I'm like, man, that should have been caught too, right? But at the same time,
So, like, I don't know. Every time I try to sign for a package, like the screen is
yeah,
half broken, and I just
that's
do
yeah,
nothing, right?
yeah, and that's what I thought. But it would be interesting because, like I said, it would print the name too, and
Okay,
it would be like first name, different last name, or something like that.
interesting.
Well, then there was one person that we got the forensic image of that really was a treasure trove. We found, I mean, I don't know why they specifically their OPSEC was really bad. I'll say that. Like they didn't store all their information like on a separate machine. For some reason, they were just using the work machine as like
Yeah, I'm
their
surprised by that.
storage. Yeah. So like we found like spreadsheets of all their aliases, and the spreadsheet with the aliases also had their like login credentials for each site. So it'd be like their LinkedIn,
Yeah,
their and you know everything as a hacker by trade, right? Everything in me it took to not log into all those accounts and start
that's
seeing
amazing.
what's
I
going
mean,
on.
conceivably, right? That's for usability because
Correct.
they need to have those passwords on that
Yes.
machine instead of like
Yep.
retype whatever it
Yep.
is. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so that one was really nice because that actually helped us give the FBI basically a ton because the FBI can go do that stuff right with the proper authorization. We can't, so that was very interesting because that helped the FBI a lot.
Let me ask a question about that.
Yeah,
You said it linked out to their LinkedIn account and conceivably sock puppet identities, right?
yep,
Was there, I don't know if you, I mean, I assume you looked at them perhaps.
yeah, yeah,
Was there anything obvious when you looked at the page of the person on LinkedIn that would have been, I mean, maybe
yeah,
retroactively like a red
yeah.
flag that you wouldn't have
Yeah,
noticed initially?
retroactively for sure. That was one of the things that we actually, because when we gave the final report, we gave a lot of indicators to, or a lot of lessons learned that you can improve on. One of the big one is, and I'm glad you brought that up too, is the images were either we really saw two things. One, I don't know if you've seen LinkedIn where like your image is just like the letter of your name or something like that. I don't know if you've seen that, but it was like that was one of the options that we saw a lot is like just the letter of their name. There was no like actual image. Or the other one was it was pretty clearly an AI image, right? It was a person, even with an AI background or whatever, but it was very clearly some sort of AI photo. Um, and so like we noticed that too. We were like, this is kind of weird. So then this was early in the investigation and I forgot to mention it, but like one of the things we noticed too is if I Google, for instance, if I Google your email, right? Unless you just created that email yesterday, there's going to be some sort of results. And we started to find that just Googling all their personal emails had no results. And I'm like, no presence is a problem.
You know, before I drop this thought, because it might be a useful thing
Yeah.
for people who are listening to this. Given their email and given that it's a real email that's actually been used, it should be present in breaches as well. Did you
Correct. That's a good call. Yeah.
like going into have I been pwned and just saying
Yeah.
like, has this email ever been, you know, like if you look
Yeah.
mine up, right, it's stolen over 2 decades, right, all over the
Yep.
place. That's an interesting way of thinking about it too.
Yeah, no, that's a great call out. That's another one I'm going to add too, actually, because yeah, it was interesting because what we ended up doing is creating a to really track it down and make sure we're right is we created a custom tool with the help of another team, and we created a custom tool that actually would go through all Chat GPT logs for the entire company, and you could do this on demand or you can whatever, and it would look for all the patterns that we found. So it would look for obviously the script. It would look for things like you know, different patterns that it would find of like, hey, every Monday, whatever, they're asking for this, or it would say like, you know, people saying give me a breakdown of work based on what I've given you, like stuff like that, where the indicators are, yeah, you might get some false positives very rarely, but for the most part, people use ChatGPT as a tool, not as their source of this is my entire work. And so we were like, look for these indicators. Another one was anytime, because we noticed that every now and then they might make a mistake and put like a Mandarin word or something in there. So anything with Mandarin, we added Korean as well, but we didn't expect to find anything. And we created this custom tool that would because the sim had searching and querying and everything, but we wanted something a little bit more robust that could look for regex patterns and all this stuff. And the sim could do that, but you'd have to create detections for each piece, and it would and the logs were um, not parsed correctly because it was still a new thing they were doing. So we just created a custom tool that did this, exported all the Chat GPT logs, and we're able to do this. And I mean, it categorized them from like critical, high, medium, low as far as like threats. And I mean, it was almost 100% accurate. With critical is these people. And so when we talked to the FBI about that, it was funny. They said, you're the only people we've ever seen do that. You're the only people that have used those logs against them. And that's probably because most people don't ingest ChatGPT logs, right? That's a lot of data. But we even noticed, like, we even started doing or finding indicators that we were adding to this tool. Like, they would do things like they would take their meetings and all their meetings, and they would take the information, put it into ChatGPT, and then like the next day they'd be like, "Hey, can you create my report, but also reference something from that meeting?" And then it would be like a joke about coffee or something, like, "I need my coffee this morning," or something, and it would directly reference that in the script. And then every morning they would send a, "Hey, good morning, boss. Like, did you get your coffee yet?" Or whatever. And then and so it felt very, quote unquote human, right? That was the point.
Yeah. Is there did you look at the frequency of use? Like, were they the top users based on all this activity? Okay. Like, I'm thinking because there's probably a lot of people listening thinking, brilliant, but we can't and won't do that.
Yeah.
Like, is there some other way? And so maybe you could look at tokens or whatever.
Yep. That's a great call out. Yeah. So when I said before, we started with just general AI, right? They were not just the frequent user of like the approved AI. They were the frequent user of every AI, right? They were using more AI than anybody. So that was one of the easy ones, is like we looked at frequency and we said, okay, who's the top, right? And it would be, to be fair, I mean, if you're a developer, you're probably one of the top because you're probably using an API that's helping you code and stuff like that. So we did have to parse through some of it, but for the most part, they were pretty much the frequent user at all times. But then the problem came too was you would see they were frequent user as far as how much they're using it in the time frame, but overall they're not, because they're only working 2 hours a day. So they're using it. Yeah. So it'd be like, we're using nothing but AI, but then we're gone for 20 hours. Right.
Okay.
And so then we started talking to the managers and noticing the managers were like, yeah, cause I had their Teams chats. So I was going through their Teams chats and I noticed all of them would be like, can't make this meeting, can't make this. And it was all due to my computer's not running correctly. This is happening. At one point it's like the Teams, is it like the Teams join meeting button isn't there, and like all this stuff. And it's one of those things where, like, for an everyday person, I understand why you might believe that, but also anyone that's worked in IT for an extended period has probably ran into most issues that you're going to find. And you're like, never seen that one. Right.
Yeah. Let alone like if you're hiring a developer, right? I'll accept Teams is broken once or twice, but after that, it's like, what's wrong? Like, how to computer person, right? Like,
and that's exactly what we noticed is like, hey, you guys were so focused on time or on speed, like we just need to get stuff done. You were ignoring all this. Mm-hmm. And at one point it was like, hey, I need to work different hours, all this other stuff. So that was definitely one of the things that we noticed. The other thing we noticed is, right off the bat, that actually initially alarmed us and kind of scared us a little bit. We actually thought this might be bigger than we can handle, only because we thought this was because of the suspension and nobody else like just trying to steal stuff or running or hiding or anything. Everyone just kept working as normal as far as the scammers. So we thought, okay, they must be just kind of disjointed, disassociated with each other and just be working. But we noticed really quickly when we were reading their Teams chats that they actually were very sophisticated and working together quite a bit. They were like actually communicating with each other, and this is where it got scary. And this is where, thank goodness, the company caught it when they did, is because we noticed right off the bat they actually started developing their hierarchy, right? Because most of them didn't even know, because AI generated their resumes, probably didn't even know really what role they had. So they would be like, yeah, I'm a developer, but like, am I the senior developer? I don't know. So they would start talking with each other in teams, and they'd be like one of them would be like, hey, I just updated the manager or whatever. And they'd be like, no, you don't update the manager. So-and-so updates the manager because he's the team lead. Like, they would have to like explain the hierarchy to each other. And so they'd be like,
In
oh,
Teams
okay.
on their
Yeah.
company
Yeah.
machine. Okay, so there's
Yeah.
another log source for people
Yes.
who are looking at Teams chats, right?
Yes.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. And a lot of them were on separate teams, but communicating. I mean, they were the most. They were communicating with each other the most out of everybody. So it
Mhm.
was like, as far as who else they would communicate with. So it was like their manager and then each other, and that was it. They weren't talking to anybody else. So we were like, that's weird. So we noticed that they were much more sophisticated than we thought. Then it got scary because we noticed after that they started sharing credentials back and forth on Teams. Then they started sharing keys, and I was like, uh-oh, right? Because where are they getting them? Well, one of them might have access to a vault over here, but then they would share the key to the rest of them, right? And then et cetera. And so we thought that's scary. Then it got scarier because we were tracking their AI. We noticed they're using AI to also begin to map out the environment, right? So they were asking AI, hey, based on all your knowledge, can you give me diagrams of the environment? Can you start to tell me, where these servers are, like stuff like that? Luckily, the company actually had a pretty good policy for AI where it was forbidden to upload documents like that, right? And because they were ingesting the logs, they could actually see if you were. So luckily, the company or the AI had very little knowledge about the infrastructure, so couldn't actually. They gave them a little bit, but couldn't really give them much. So we started to notice like it's ramping up, right? Like they're starting to ask for prod access. They're starting to, map out the environment or the environment. They're starting to do a lot of stuff like that. And so we were starting to get a little worried, right? So we did the watch and learn, like you said. We grabbed the data and we're like, we immediately have to shut them off. Like, we can't, this is going to get bad. Well, the FBI did tell us, right? Like, there's times where if they get enough information, they'll extort you. And then if they can't extort you, right? If they have the availability, they'll pass it off to the Lazarus group, which is the actual hacking group that's going to try to attack you. So that was really interesting because we were always aware that it could happen. We were a little fearful that it might happen, right? And we learned more about about what they were doing, and we said, okay, again, we're worried. The company's a little bit worried that they're going to let the wrong person go, get sued, which makes sense. That's the legal's job. But we said, okay, is there anything you can do, like with the background checks that can, because if you fail a background check and you lie, like that's a fireable offense also. So they said, well, we do actually have this ability to check for other employment, because if you're a certain level, right, like an executive, you can't go work at other companies at the same time without approval. So they're like, we do have the ability to check if you have other employment. And they did this pretty early, and it was interesting because you would expect, like, okay, maybe these people work somewhere else or something else or whatever. And we had them run the checks, and I think the one that worked the least was like 8 jobs. They had like 8 other IT jobs, right?
So they're using the same fake whatever
Yes.
credentials across multiple, and they
Yeah,
all registered with a background check company.
Yep. And you started to.
Why is that not part of the background check?
Exactly. That's and I don't know how that part works because that's not a
Yeah, of
IT
course.
thing. But so I was like, okay, at least you found it, but I don't know why you're not doing that every single time you're checking.
I mean, the
these people.
background check companies have the key to all of this, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that, and another thing and this is kind of just, I'm going to go through lessons learned after, but one thing I recommend also is if you have the capability, always do it in person. Even if you say, yeah, you got to drive 5 hours, we'll do it one time.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's day one, if it's your first day, like just meet the person, because we noticed as soon as we said, hey, you guys are in Texas, come to the office. We have an office Texas or a Texas office, and come on in and whatever. All of them, no way they're coming in, right? And so, so yeah, it was starting to get pretty bad, and we were a little bit worried. But HR identified that like they have 8 jobs, 10 jobs, 15 jobs, whatever, and which aligns perfectly with the DPRK IT scam. But what worried us a lot was in the DPRK IT scam, right? The extortion piece after was a big one that we're like, this is going to come and it's going to hopefully not be bad. So they were asking, what data do they have? So now we got to do a forensics. We're already doing the behavioral investigation, but now we got to do a forensic and say, here's what they have, right? And so we started to notice really all they had, because the company did actually have a decent policy in place of like, they can't just get prod access, right? They have to go through this period or whatever. They actually mostly had development code, and they had a lot of code. They had credentials. Well, cool. We can rotate all your credentials. We can get that all changed, right? So this was a large plan, right? This came together. It was about 6 weeks, and it was a large plan of we have to do this all at once, right? Because once they're on to us, they're either going to extort, turn it over, something's going to happen. So that's where we kind of got nervous. And what we did is we got all their information together. We, like I said, we watched and learned. We came up with the plan, and we said, okay, on this date, we're going to rotate all the credentials. We're going to disable all their accounts. We're going to quarantine all their machines. And the company actually had machine level certs for VPN access. So you can never connect to the VPN again, right? Like, we're going to revoke that. We're going to do everything we can. And we're going to do all this all at once. So funny enough, it was so weird because, in cybersecurity, you look for patterns, right? And it was so funny because we saw so many patterns of them working together. But then at times it felt like have they ever even talked to each other, right? Because we did it, and immediately half of them just blocked the number of the company and is like, don't ever call me again. Don't talk to me. We're never talking again, right? And then the other half called one more time and is like, where's my last paycheck? And it's like, this leads us to some more indicators that we found, right? So one of the things is we noticed is like, why didn't they get their paycheck? We thought that's kind of odd because every company does direct deposit now. So we're like, why didn't you get your paycheck? Well, we went back and found what happened was as soon as they got hired on, they tried to change their bank routing information to some foreign bank, right? Well, that got denied or delayed the process. So they got a paper check. Well, it got sent to an address that doesn't exist, right? And they can't reroute it because they didn't even know it was coming. And so then it got sent back, bounced back. So you're talking, 6-8 weeks without a check. And now they're like, I want all my money, right? And so the company made a decision that I actually thought was good because I think you should stand up to this type of stuff. But they said, no, sue me, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Sue me
can.
that exactly. You're going to sue me that you're
Pretty safe
fake?
bet there, yeah.
Yeah. So they said, no, we're not going to give it to you. Well, then extortion came, right? Well, they were very light on the extortion, I'll say. I don't know if they did that intentionally to avoid like the police, because we had theoretically their location, right? If it's accurate. But what it was they were basically like, we have a lot of your code. And so like we talked to the development team and we're like, with the code you have now, how close is it to prod, right? Like, are you going next week? Because then that might be a problem if they have something that, and they're like, no, it's all pretty early in the pipeline. We've got all the keys are changed. We've got all the credentials. We've gone through all of our checks, right? We've done everything. We had their, all their communications. We had pretty much everything. So we knew what they had. And we said, okay, it's not great, right? You don't want to just give this out, but also it's not going to be a detriment. So, you can stand your ground or you can fight it. It's up to you, or pay it, right? It's up to you. So all of them almost went away except for one. He was adamant. He blocked our number and he just kept calling from different numbers. And he would call and he'd say, if you don't give me my paycheck, I have all this information, blah, blah. And I think we finally, because the company's like, okay, this is our last like straggler, if you will, right? And so they're like, how much do we owe this person? Like, why are they making it such a big deal? It was like $2,000, right? Like so they're like, just give them the $2,000 and leave us alone. Stop calling and threatening because, you're going to release the code, whatever. And then comes the hard part that we, luckily I don't have to be involved with, but the unfortunate part, right, is yes, the company is a victim because 6 weeks of time, dedication, effort, the SOC, like all this investigation, all this stuff. But all of the 15 people or whatever, right, that's a real person. They stole that identity. So like what we'd find is when we were doing that, the checks for the background or for the external work, right, it's like, yeah, they have 8 jobs, but one of them is a UPS driver, right? It's like, that's the real guy.
Okay.
you know?
So they were
And
used
so,
real. They were
yeah,
completely real, like stolen. They had
yeah,
social security
yeah.
numbers, like all that stuff.
Yep, the whole thing.
Interesting.
And we had all that information. So we were like, that's the unfortunate part for the FBI, right? You got to go, and we asked them, you're going to tell this person, right? Like you can't just leave this out. And they said they would. So that's the thing that sucks is like you got to go out and you've got to go tell this person you're probably, your work history screwed, because if
Yeah.
I go to exactly like you said, if now I run a background check, well, it shows that you've worked at 12 places and got fired from 10 of them, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so like then who knows if their credit's in trouble, like all this other stuff.
Right.
So we started to really feel bad about that, but at the same time, we were glad we caught it. And we didn't realize the scale of it at the time, right? Like most companies that don't get hit with it, we thought, yeah, this happens, whatever. But then we started talking to the FBI, and it's like every Fortune 500 has multiple of these people working for them,
Hmm.
and they don't realize it. And what happens is a lot of them just get worked in, and then eventually, hey, they stink at their job, so managed out, right?
Yep.
And you never know that they were not even a real person or whatever. Um, and so what we kind of implemented, right, for the company is they changed their interview policy completely. So the interview procedure now was, for one, if you're within range, you have to do an in person. For two, if you have a background, or I mean, if you're doing virtual, you have to turn your background off. You cannot have a virtual background during an interview, right? And we noticed that we were still getting so many fake applicants, and I'm sure this is something that, and it's kind of interesting because I teach entry level people to get into cyber, and one of the things I try to push is like everyone thinks there's this shortage of jobs in cyber, and while there's more of a shortage of talent, because when you get hired, or if as a executive, when I go to hire somebody, I'm getting 500-600 applicants. 90% of them are probably fake, AI, fraud, whatever. I have to find the one person who's real and also good and skilled. So it's so easy for your resume to just not make it through that whole process. And so that's one thing I want people to realize too, is like, understand from that side of it, it's got nothing to do with like you're doing something wrong or you don't have the qualifications or the company is a jerk because they don't want to hire this new entry level person or whatever. It's a lot of times it never even makes it to that stage, because if your resume is even close to somebody else's, which if you go to the same college as somebody, you're taught to create the same resume, right?
Mhm.
So if your resume is even close, it's so hard for a company to go, are those two scamming me? Are they real? Are they not? And so we noticed that as well. Like immediately after, we started to see a huge uptick in like false positives. Like people were reporting like, oh, this person's suspicious, this person's doing, and it's like, I'm glad they're reporting it, but obviously not everybody is a scam artist, right? Not everybody is, et cetera. So it was very interesting, and we had a ton of indicators that we came up with. The the Google Translate one was a very easy one for us, because if you have the GET requests, you can actually see exactly what they're translating. We noticed another one was like Fiverr.com. A lot of them use that. Well, we noticed in the request, in the GET request, it actually would show you like the profile of whose account they're going to. So we were able to grab the full URL and go, that's a developer. Why are you reaching out to a developer if you're a developer on a hiring site, right? So
Let
like
alone like
that was,
Fiverr anything is like
yeah,
a huge red
exactly.
flag. Yeah.
So we were like, okay, that's really weird. We noticed that, like you said, no internet presence is a red flag. So we gave like a whole bunch of these indicators to HR and said, hey, when you get a resume that you're thinking about interviewing, just Google the email, and that got rid of half of them right there, right? Because most of them come back with nothing, and it's like, okay, they probably created it last week, right? Or what? Or they've never emailed anybody, right?
Mm.
We noticed that they almost exclusively were using Markdown language for their resumes, unless the platform didn't allow you to, and
Mm.
then they would try to convert it or whatever. One thing that was a little bit scary, and I think everybody's seeing this now, is they actually at times would use the AI to it was their face, but to speak perfect English. And we knew this because we had the recordings of what that person actually sounds like. And then so we would watch the video of them talking to like someone in China, and we would be like, okay. And then every now and then they might speak a little English. It's really broken. It's really hard. And then we would go watch one of the meetings at the company, and we listen to that. And it's like really good English. But if you really listen, I mean, anyone that's like been in the AI space for a long time, you can tell just a little bit, right? There's just a little like weird pause or something.
Slightly inhuman, yeah.
Yeah. And so you're like, oh, they're using AI. The other one we noticed that could be caught early is if you ask them like a really personal question, and I say really personal, but like just dive into their personal life a little bit. AI didn't know what to say, so at times they just wouldn't respond at all.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's really
just freeze up.
Weird. Yeah, like no human, when you ask a question, just doesn't say anything.
This is something we just added into 551, actually, like a whole discussion on like how do we catch people there. And yeah, like that's one of the things that I've read over and over. It's like, ask them something about a specific situation, a specific part of their life, or you said, if they're in Texas, North Carolina, whatever, right? Like, conceivably people that live in a major city are going to know something about that city, right?
Yeah.
So if you're like, oh, did you like how the Eagles, won or whatever, right? If they say they live in Philly, right? And they have no idea what you're talking about, like that would be a huge red flag. That would be totally normal in a conversation with an interview, right? So I wonder if like that kind of thing could also boost it.
That definitely, like those are things we mentioned to because we afterwards we did a kind of an entire presentation for their management to say, here's what you could have found, what that type of thing. And we found it was funny. We actually found, like you said, they had to have this stuff on the work machine just for usability, because it didn't make sense why you'd transfer all this here. But they even had like termination letters from other companies that they'd worked for on the machine.
What?
Like, yeah, because they'd been fired from multiple jobs for basically breach of cybersecurity policies, breaking the policy, stealing data and uploading it places, stuff like that. One of the weird indicators too that we found, and it won't work for everybody, but we noticed if they're using things like Adobe or anything like that, like PDF, they actually would go and download the extended language packs because they need it to translate. So this was a completely US based company. So we were like, you might have one or two people do that, but you're not going to have a group of people doing that. So we noticed like stuff like that. We noticed just kind of a lot of that weird activity, but the key to it, one, like you said, number one is the background checks for one. That's one of the major keys. But the other key to it, right, is throughout the entire process, everybody could have caught it at some point, right? Yep. And it shouldn't have taken the SOC going, hey, this is weird, right? Because if you think about it, if that person didn't set off that alarm, and that person didn't raise the flag and say, hey, something's weird, they could have had 50, 100 by the time that, this all got done, and it could have got really ugly. And one thing I'm sure a lot of people in the questions are going to ask is like, how do they do all this? Because you have EDR, you have SIM, you have like all these tools, XDR, whatever. You have all these tools that should alert if you do screen recording software. If you start, I don't know this because obviously I'm not part of the DPRK, but in my opinion, that's why they target development roles. Developers have admin access and have the ability to install tools. So anyone else at the company that if you had any other position, they would have been caught immediately. But they had free reign in development. And what they were trying to do is work their way to production. And who knows what they would have done if they'd gotten there. One of them actually did get to the production stage. And luckily he was so new to the production stage, he hadn't pushed any changes yet. But, we don't know what would have happened at that time if they'd gotten there. But it was interesting because even myself in security, initially when they called, it's like, how did you not catch this, right? But then you look at it, you're like, oh, they're developers. So that makes sense. You don't have the same security tools. And
yeah, putting my detection engineer hat on for a moment, this is a perfect case for similar job comparison where if you have a bunch of developers, you can go into your SIM and say, or your EDR, show me all the binaries that are being run on all of my developer machines and look for the standouts there, right? And
Yep.
there are going to be some that these people are going to have to run to get, I mean, and whether it's binaries or really anything, right? Like
Yeah.
they are going to be unique in
Yeah.
certain ways. And that could be another strong way of maybe sussing out who is who.
Yeah. Funny enough, we implemented, or we gave them a plan to implement of basically that, right? Find out what your developers need admin access for and what they're actually using it. Like do set up some sort of monitoring mode for a little bit. Find out what they're actually using and then set up detections if they use anything that's not approved. Even it doesn't have to block it or whatever cuz right, developers have to test and play, but unless you have 5 600 developers, you're not going to be getting that many new things. You might get their new scripts, right? Like you can tune that out if they're developing their own applications, but if they go download a binary, right, like you said, let's look for that, right? And we came up with a plan, and I won't disclose how we did that, but because I know what you're thinking, right? A developer is going to set that off all the time, but the way we set it up, they wouldn't because they can actually, basically, long story short, they can say, "Hey, I'm going to be working on this, whatever." It grants temporary access. It won't set off any alerts. It just notifies of here's a new tool that just got introduced, and then you can look at it if you want to, or if you feel that that's a safe bet, whatever. And so it just was working closer with the developers and the security team to understand what they're actually doing versus this is just a playground and have fun and hope nothing happens, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was really it was unique because it was one of those things that for me as a cyber person, I'm like exactly like you in my head. This isn't a cybersecurity issue, right? This is a failure on HR background checks, like all these processes, not
Yeah.
a cybersecurity problem. But then looking back at it and going through it, I went through and after the investigation, we had lessons learned, and I thought and I built the report and everything. And in my head, I was still thinking like this isn't that issue. And then I thought, but what if cybersecurity teams dedicate their time to finding it because you can eliminate it in some ways, right? Because it's a cat and mouse game always, right? But
Yeah.
like it's a cat and mouse game for the HR too, right? They find some of this happens and then they fix it, and then the DPRK is going to use something else, and then they're going to fix it and whatever. But if you build that culture on the whole front, right, and just build rules, detections, start using these indicators, maybe day one, yeah, they got through the HR filters, but you weed them out, right? Because
Right.
I don't know this, we didn't see this, but I would assume they talk in at least some capacity of, I got hired on here, right? So why not have all of you apply here, right?
Yeah.
And they may not, but it would make sense. We saw that they were sophisticated. We saw that they were communicating with each other. But one thing is that they can't avoid, right, is the amount that they were applying for jobs. Because at one point we saw they had a list of all the it was like a Excel spreadsheet, and it was all the jobs that they had actually applied for, gotten, whatever, and it was like tracking, and it was automated for sure. It was over 5,000 positions at the time we saw it, so we knew that this is completely automated, and it's going through the list, it's all that stuff. So we knew that it was a lot bigger problem than what we handled here, but we thought if you can even just burn one of their sock puppet profiles, right? Which in
Yeah.
this case, we burned quite a few because they actually listed them for us. But even burning them helps everybody out. So that's one of the things I want to add as well is even if you find one, right, report it to the FBI because the FBI has an entire task force dedicated to the DPRK and for this scam at least, and they will add it, and then the next person that gets hit, they have those indicators, they have that stuff. So just sharing that information was huge, and they were very grateful with what we gave them and some of the indicators that we found, because I'm sure this has been a problem for long enough that when we first talked to them about it, it kind of felt like they were like, well, another victim, sorry, like there's not much, and then afterwards they're like, oh wow, like this really helped. And so we were like, I bet you have so many people that just go, oh, we got hit. And then, but we were like, no, because they asked us initially for all the indicators. And I said, no, we're going to spend a lot of time really building this out for you because I think we're going to have indicators that you don't have, because we were able to get full image forensics. We were able to use their AI. We were able to do some of this stuff. And when we did, like I said, they were very grateful. So it was a very good partnership, and it was a very unique experience for me, because like I said, it wasn't necessarily a cyber incident response that you're used to, but it turned into forensics, behavioral analysis, like all these other categories, and it became a huge investigation that was actually really fun for me, because I'm used to doing the incident response part, right? Like, oh, you get hit with this, you do this, right? But this one was like, there's no playbook for this, right? We don't know. So you're just kind of, like you said, engineering it, figuring it out. And so this was one of the most fun ones I've done in a long time, because it was new and exciting, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, for anyone listening, right, if you're worried about this, we know who the consulting expert is in that now.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there's companies that have been hit with much bigger than what we
Yeah,
did.
I mean,
but
you have described in this podcast an incredible wealth of stuff that I've never heard anywhere else before, in terms of, I mean, maybe people have seen it, but I've not
yeah,
heard this kind of detail given. So huge thank you for that. That's amazing. I have a ton of kind of thoughts and
yeah,
questions about all of this, just kind of dancing all over this. So one thing that came to mind is just thinking about going back to the interaction of these people with their manager. If someone is a human and a human that is who they say they are, they're going to be able to have a natural flowing conversation, right? Now, you said these were people conceivably who seemed like Americans. They can jump on a video call, they can answer questions. Were they in one-on-one meetings conceivably then having, like, relaying traffic through someone who is an American, but being told kind of what to
yes,
happen there? And then also is that person who's acting as the real human, right? The American in this situation, using ChatGPT in that moment to have that
yeah,
conversation. Okay.
yeah. So that's a great call out, because it goes back, and I danced around it. I didn't say it, but exactly what you said, right? Is the two that we found that were 100% American, right? We could tell, because like I said, it's kind of really hard to explain to somebody how you can tell if a video is AI. And I'm not saying I can tell every video that's AI ever, but when you see it, you know it, right? You're like, that's not normal. And
Yeah.
so, like, we knew these people are real, because I had full conversations with them. They were hopping on calls. They were doing, like, we knew these are real American citizens, or at least English speaking.
Mhm.
Um, and so exactly what you said, right? They were a proxy for
Right.
the real issue. And we only saw two of those. The rest of them were, they would avoid a call like the plague, right? They would
Okay.
avoid that one-on-one meeting, but if they had to, they would hop on, and then we could see, because again, I don't know why they record everything. I don't know if for training or what, but they would record those calls, so we could hear the AI in the voice, and we're like, it's just not quite there. So you're like, but you could tell they avoid it, right? They are saying as little as possible. They are, every morning before their manager can say anything, they're giving an update via Teams, so they don't have to, like, hop on a call. They're trying to, they miss calls all the time, that type of stuff. So we saw that the ones that didn't have that English proxy definitely tried to avoid those calls. But to your credit, exactly what you said, right? And the FBI said the same thing, right? Like, these people are, whether they're paid money, or whatever, they're just, they don't even, I don't think, from the conversation I had with the individual that got let go initially, I don't think they even understood really what they were doing. They just were probably getting paid to do something,
They have to
because,
know. Like,
well, you'd think they would know, but like,
they're
this
doing that for
person,
multiple people in multiple places,
oh
I'm
yeah,
sure. I
yeah.
have no doubt they know
When
what
I
they're
say
doing.
that, what I mean is they probably are sold on, oh, we're just gonna use this to get paychecks or whatever, like, which is true, but
Yeah.
they don't know. It, also, if you guys don't know, if you look it up, the DPRK IT scam actually directly funds North Korea's nuclear program.
Mhm.
So for that reason, right? I don't know that they know what they're associating
I'm sure
themselves
they don't
with.
know what they're, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't think they know
yeah,
who is really behind it. And I'm sure that
yeah,
they've been given a ruse by those people. I think I read an
yep,
article, it was either New York Times, Wall Street Journal recently, of a woman that got caught doing this. And her
yeah,
whole thing was like, I had no idea like this is what it actually was. Like, I
yeah,
kind of had an idea this was shady, but like they told
yeah,
her it was, oh, you're facilitating helping
yep,
people work somewhere else, right? But like
yep.
they have an idea.
Yeah. No, and I think that's exactly what it was. Like you said, a developer has at least some understanding. And we did find like some of these were skilled enough IT people to like get around. They knew
Hmm.
I mean, they obviously were downloading tools and doing stuff, but they just weren't as skilled developers as their resume claims, right?
Hmm.
They're not 15-year developers, whatever. And but we noticed with the Americans, they were not skilled in the least. Like they couldn't figure out their computer, they couldn't figure this out.
Right.
And a lot of that, some of that's a ruse, right? Because they have to claim their computer doesn't work so they can be working at night and stuff like this. But at the same time, when walking through them, they were fumbling through everything, and you're like, all right, you aren't a developer, so you're not the one doing this, right? If you use certain language, they were like, I don't know what that is. And so you're like, all right, well, at best, right, you just lied on your resume. But
Right. Another thing that kind of struck me here, and I think you kind of got to this, but I wanted to ask specifically to make sure I was understanding. So they put their whole day into AI, right? And then you also mentioned some people use Fiverr. The first thing, before you mentioned the Fiverr thing, I was like, does that mean AI is actually doing the work of a human to an acceptable level that we can't tell they're not really developers? And then you said the Fiverr thing, right?
yeah,
So I wanted to ask specifically, was everyone taking AI to understand their day, but having people on Fiverr do the work? Or were some people actually getting by at this company, conceivably only using AI and pulling it off?
yeah, no, that's a great call out. So one of the things we noticed is it felt very much like these people come out of the gate, right? I'm a developer, and they're using AI because the tasks they're getting at the beginning are like very easy
Hmm.
development tasks, right? Like, can you make this site talk to this database? Like stuff like that. And ChatGPT or any of them, Gemini, any of that, Copilot can do that. So they were using AI to do it. Once it started getting more sophisticated, that's when you'd start to see delays in why they couldn't get things done and all this other stuff, as well as starting to hire other people. But it felt like, based on everything that we saw, they really didn't actually care too much about the work. Like they didn't care if it gets done. They didn't care they were trying to hang on as long as they can to make as much money on the paychecks and then bail, right?
Right.
They weren't so if at a certain point it was like if they couldn't do it, we noticed they just like, hey, I'll delay, maybe get someone on Fiverr, whatever. If not, if I get let go, I get let go. Like it didn't seem like a concern to them as far as like the actual work. But to your point, right? It was doing acceptable work. In my opinion, it was doing acceptable work for a junior level developer, right?
Okay.
And that's like I said, that can be taken with a grain of salt because I didn't see the security scans of the code or anything like that. So
Sure.
maybe it had a bunch of vulnerabilities. But as far as the actual, code itself, it looked representable of a junior level developer.
Yeah. And as models keep improving, right, they're going to be
Yes,
able to do more and
yes,
more. Right.
exactly.
Yep. Um, I'm thinking like this is a traditional defense in depth kind of situation, but way beyond the SOC, right? So we
Yeah,
have the background check, we have the interview process, we have the daily interactions, we have the actual technical logs that the SOC would have access to, and like just all of this, right? And it's the
yep,
typical like multi-point failure where groups are not talking to each other. And
yep,
had anyone talk to anyone else, like we would have put the dots together probably
yep.
earlier on, figured it out. But yeah, that's a really interesting kind of convergence of data and how obvious it is when you have the whole picture like you
Yeah,
did. But a lot of people don't have that. Yeah, really
yep.
interesting stuff. I guess the other thing I'm thinking here is, and I don't know if you still have access to the data for this or not,
Mhm.
but it would be interesting to know if these people were working together, right? Conceivably, they all got hired as developers and I don't know if they were all talking with each other or maybe there were
Mhm.
subgroups within it, but there are logs that says who talks to who, right? When
Yep,
you're running Microsoft 365 or whatever
yep.
you're using. So I wonder if you were to do some kind of statistical analysis of the conversations happening within your developer teams, if there would be some kind of anomaly that could be picked up, say like, hey, there's this one subgroup
Yeah,
of three people that are always talking to each other. But like
yeah,
naturally that would happen in
yeah,
any kind of developer, but maybe there's something unique there given the
yeah.
content. I don't know.
No, and it's funny because we thought about that too, and because we did see the pattern, right?
Mhm.
The hard part, for one, was during implementation. It would have taken us longer to figure out that solution to just look at it at this point. But one of the things we noticed was it, like you said, some of that developed naturally, right? Like you would see, hey, they're working together, but it makes sense because one of them was hired as lead developer and the other one's right
Hmm.
below him. Like they're working daily. But one thing we noticed was there was 3 or 4 of them, I can't remember, that were in a group chat, and they were every day in this group chat. They weren't on the same teams. So it would be weird. Like,
Yeah.
imagine you get hired at a company and the first thing you do is reach out to another team and just like like a random low level developer, like not like the team lead or manager or whatever. And then you start a group chat and you guys just every morning or and day are talking. It was definitely a pattern that we used because they shared a lot of information. That's where they shared keys and stuff like that. We noticed it right away, but it was also one of those things that like you said, how do we engineer this in a way that doesn't set off every time someone starts, you're going to start to see these patterns grow, and maybe you grow with friends or whatever. And so yeah, it was something that we knew was a pattern. We didn't know how to implement it properly.
Mhm. Yeah, that's probably a more down in the weeds one, but maybe given the suspicion, right, of a
Yeah,
list that you can start from, you could say, all right, here are the 20 people.
yeah,
Oh, 3 of them are talking and they conceivably have no job
yep,
connection and wouldn't know each other, right? That
yep,
could be a way of maybe confirming but not starting the investigation. That'd be an
yeah.
interesting move
That's one
there.
thing we noticed on their resumes, right? Is we looked for, because that's the argument initially, right? Is you have 2 resumes, 3 resumes. We actually had 3 or 4 that were almost identical, right? They had like skill sets and they were like word for word skill sets and stuff. And like we did an analysis on it, and it was like statistically so impossible that like it wasn't even a percent.
Right.
Like it was so impossible to even do. So like to have, so we're like, the argument is, right, do they know each other? Are they friends and they got together, right? But then you look and you're like, well, one of them lives in Seattle and one lives in Boston, right? Like they're two as far away as possible. Conceivably, maybe, but they went to completely different schools. For the last 20 years, they've worked at one point, like one of them worked at like Deloitte or something. It's like, no, we know you
Yeah.
didn't work there, right? And
Yep.
so like all these, there was no connection, but yet it matched. So you're
Mm.
like you said, if you could find that pattern, right, with just the groups that you had, and that's what kind of what we did. But if you could automate that process versus manually going through it.
Yeah. I guess the other thing I'm thinking is back to what the SOC would normally have access to. The most obvious thing I think to me that came up through what you said there is like repetitively trying to download RMM tools, right?
Yes.
That's one of the things we mentioned in class, right? It's like, how do you turn a low quality, kind of low priority thing into something that's higher quality? It's a
Yeah.
bunch of low priority things
Yeah.
happening at the same account, same place, same person. So yeah, like one RMM tool is kind of shady.
Yeah.
Certainly most people wouldn't even do that. But if you see 8 of them, deny,
Yeah.
deny, 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 like that's
Yep.
as big of a
Yep.
red flag as you can possibly wave. So some of those
Yeah.
kind of things.
And
Anything
and
else like
funny,
that?
yeah, so kind of to what you said, one of the reason that got missed, right, initially, because that should have been caught, I agree, was the detection wasn't set up to properly detect them in the way of the DNS logs were brought in one side, right? And so they were seeing blocked sites, but then the alert that detected for the execution was a different alert entirely. And so it, like you said, there should have been a correlation of the DNS logs with the application logs, right? Rather than you're doing them separately, where you're just saying DNS logs notify me if they go to a malicious site. That's all really it was, right? And so having that context and pulling that in really mattered. So that was something we recommended as well. And I think, like you said, it was very odd. Odd's not even the right word, right? Like you almost can't deny malicious intent at a certain point, right? And so
Yeah.
that was one of those ones where it's like, yeah, we can't deny malicious intent. Um,
Yeah.
as far as, let's see, I've got my indicators that I wanted to talk about. Let's see, I think we went through most of them, but
To that end, actually, where you're looking at that, the RMM thing, that's a absolutely necessary thing to pull this off, right? Everyone doing the scam is
yes,
going to have an RMM solution. So, as a security practitioner, how do you approach that? In my mind, it's get a list of all of them, and there are a
yep,
lot, right?
yep,
But set up both a maybe it's hash or signature based execution alert on that, and also I would say a DNS and or proxy web
yep,
traffic, right, related for that. So one place that I know that you can get a pretty comprehensive list is Red Canary's threat report, because
mhm,
they talk about this as a scam and they have a huge page full of a ton
yep,
of different solutions there. So I don't know if there's like a ready to go list of all the websites there. You could probably make that easily with AI if it doesn't exist
yeah,
already. It probably does, but like just that, right? Just saying DNS requests for more than, 2 RMM
Yeah.
tools, right? Should be the thing that immediately
Yep.
sets one of those things off. Whether it's DNS, whether it's the file, whether it's going to the site with HTTP, like any of those things,
Yeah.
and any, a DNS and a file, not just all DNS, all
Yeah.
files, right? Like all that kind of stuff, I think would be really good.
No, that's a great call, and that is something we recommended they implement is exactly what you said. There's a detection rule now at that company for all RMM tools that aren't approved, right? Because everyone uses some sort of tool for their help desk. But like you said, it should have been caught 100%. It was very interesting that it wasn't. But then, it comes down to what we noticed too is like some of them didn't use the RMM tool. What they were doing is they were using screen sharing, but not like actual remote management. Like you couldn't touch their computer,
Okay.
but they were using screen sharing. So we had to add those to the indicators as well, which is kind of tough because it's like if you use Teams or Slack or something, right? Like if there's that option, what's to stop them from calling in? And because we noticed that on the call too, right? Is they would just use some of the tools that the company provided and they would screen share and then they would just walk them through. So what we started to look for there is, right, the company already had it where you can't just externally share open willy-nilly. Like it was role-based access and stuff like that. So we started to look at, okay, what are the justifications for, like, let's lock that down, stop approving screen or external sharing just because someone says I want to, right? Like there needs to be a real business justification and remove that from developers because that doesn't even make sense. Why is a developer externally sharing anything unless there's a real business case, right? Unless
By
they're working with a
externally
third
share,
party.
let me clarify, make sure I understand. So
Yeah.
they were jumping on Teams calls with external individuals.
Yes. They
Okay,
would
so
bring in
they're
like a external individual into the call
so the
and then
proxy was
share.
setting up a valid Teams meeting under this
Yep.
company's account,
Yep.
and then that the actual
Yeah.
threat actor was joining it.
Yep.
Okay, so I wonder if in the logs there is a way to say, have people been screen sharing when there is a external person on the call? I don't know if that would be in there or
Yeah.
not, but that might be in.
I'm not
Okay.
sure about that. I do know that you can see though, Teams specifically does lock it down to where you can see, you can lock it down to not allow external
Yeah, I mean that's even
invites,
better, right? If people
Yeah,
are,
so
yeah,
you can stop them from inviting externally, and then if you want to do it, I need a real reason, right? Like
mm,
because these people, they really kind of they thrive in an environment that is, I don't want to say chaotic, but like in an environment that they can fly under that radar because they're not trying to set off alerts, obviously, but like you said, there's certain tooling they have to use in order to do that. One of the things that you can do as well, if you're like a U.S. based company, right, is block external. And this is only going to help some, but like you can block, anything going to China for screen sharing, right? You can block that traffic going to anything outside of the U.S. Because we noticed they were hopping on calls with people in China. And so like they would, and we only knew that because you could see Chinese stuff in the background and we grabbed the IPs and some of the IPs were China, but then at the same time there was, VPN chaining. So the location is what it is, but yeah, there was a lot of opportunity for detection engineering here and like really going to, if I was a security researcher, this would have been a day to have because you can just go through so much data and start gathering in I'm good at cybersecurity. I'm not that level good, right? Of like the security or the detection engineering and stuff where I think there's people out there that could really help prevent this, especially as more data comes out.
yeah. Anything else on the indicator list we didn't touch on?
No, I didn't see anything else. The one thing I did notice is that was an easy indicator that we actually implemented, and I forgot to mention is the address that they put on their HR. We actually implemented for the company. All new hires, that gets correlated to their IP address day one when they log in. So, and the reason for that is, right, what we noticed is one of the things they were the people were doing is like immediately some coworkers would notice weird things. They would, because we read their Teams chat, they would say something like, "Hey, can you hop on a call at this time?" And it would be like, "Well, that's like 2 p.m. my time or something." And then the person would be like, "I thought you lived in Arizona." And they'd be like, oh, I do, but I'm in, here for vacation right now. And it's like, I get vacation. Don't get me wrong. You're going to get maybe one false positive a year of someone doing this, but who goes on vacation the day they start a job, right? Like, so
Yeah.
it's like stuff like that where so that was an easy one to dictate. 'Cause almost, I think every single one of them, their IP address location did not match where they said they lived. So we were able to easily go, hey, day one, when they, because they have to do multiple things day one, right? You have to log in, you have to register your MFA, you have to do all of that should come from the same general location, right? Because your phone, because that's what we noticed too, is like if they say they're from Texas, right? They log in from Texas, but their MFA logs in from Seattle. And it's because that's your phone. That's different, right?
Yeah.
So we noticed like, okay, correlate the logs and see if they're logging in from somewhere else. And so we noticed that. And then one thing I'll give them credit for is they didn't use the company had pretty good VPN detection, so they weren't using like your standard VPN that like has hey, this IP comes from ExpressVPN or whatever. They were using commercial or residential addresses, so they were using addresses that looked legitimate in some capacity. They weren't directly coming back as this is a VPN. So that was one thing that is another thing that like don't just trust because they are good now. They can use residential addresses and don't just trust that it's not a VPN. But it was that was something we noticed right away. That was very easy. Is just notice the IP address location was not the same.
What kind of VPN technology? Like it wasn't, your Proton VPN like
Yeah,
service like that. Like they were actually just setting up a custom VPN to somewhere
I
else.
we don't know
Oh, okay.
because we gave the reason I say we don't know is we gave the information to the FBI and they came back and said yes, that is those IPs are associated with the DPRK, and we gave them, like I said, a couple hundred, I think, and but they never gave us where they were getting them, if they have a ring of them already set up, or if they, are providing or buying a service or not. But we noticed that they were not coming back. Like when you go search them and IPDB or anything else, right? They're not coming back as VPN providers. They were coming back as residential.
Interesting. The shipping addresses. Did you Google where they were supposed to be shipped and then where they
Yeah,
actually got shipped and any kind of interesting findings there?
yeah, it was interesting. So funny enough, so where they were supposed to be shipped, where they were almost exclusively, they were almost always in like an apartment and like somewhere with a shared space.
Hmm.
And I don't know if there's a specific reason they did that, other than you they never owned the buildings, right? So like they never owned a home, right? Because then you can look and see who it's registered to.
Sure.
So they own or they rented an apartment or they did this, right? And then whenever it got redirected, it was the same thing. It would always be a shared living space. It would never be. And we did notice on a couple of them that if you like looked up who owned, because what we do is we look up the apartment complex or duplex or whatever, and then you would see they were all registered to like an LLC or a company of some sort. So then you research that company, and a lot of times that company did belong to a Chinese individual. We don't know, who it was. The company itself, like one of them was like I don't even remember, but it was a Chinese company, and so we know, people that keep up on it know that China buys real estate, so it's not like a foolproof plan. But we did notice, like, oh, that's weird. Like again, it's more of a pattern thing that you can
Yeah.
determine if if you see a large group of people get hired and none of them own a home. It's not the end of the world. It's possible, but it's a little weird, right? Like
Yeah.
no one lives in a home here,
It's a piece of evidence in a sea of
Yeah,
other things you might.
exactly.
Yeah. Right. Interesting. All right. Well, that was incredibly insightful and useful. I think people are going to love this episode. I think we were probably hitting on the longest episode ever, but it was gold throughout
Yeah.
the entire thing. So I
Yeah,
really appreciate your willingness to share on this.
it was really fun. This is one of the ones I like talking about. I actually was gonna do a talk on it myself, but I really enjoy it, and I want more people to be aware of it because I think until you get hit with it, most people don't realize how big it is or care about it because they maybe saw it on the news one time or something and they think, oh, that won't happen. But it's actually, in my opinion, one of the most widespread things going on because, especially with remote work, I mean, it's just an easy scam. They don't really care that much about the job itself, but the real risk comes if they do find something. They have direct coordination with Lazarus, which is a hacking group, and if they find it, they will turn it over. So, and they've seen that. So that's one thing I want to emphasize is if you think like the impact here wasn't that big, right? Because we got lucky and caught it. They were planning something. They were mapping it out, starting to share the credentials across the network, and something was going to happen. And even if it didn't, right? If they do find that one gold mine, that one piece of information that, can cause that extortion or that ransom, then, they're going to pass that off to a real hacker group, and they already are in your network. They're already there. So it's definitely something to take seriously, even though it's a fun story and fun to do. It was a very stressful 6 weeks and something that, you really don't want to find yourself involved in.
Yeah, and I'll throw out to the listeners here, right? And you saw it in Nashville, Zach. When I pull the class, right, teaching, now I always say, like, how many people here have had in their organization have had this attempt? And at this point, like, more than half of the room is raising their hand, and the other half probably just doesn't know it and should be raising their hand, right? Yeah, so if you know it's happening, like, some of them conceivably could have gotten through. So this is not a weird, oh wow, we're special, they chose us. Like, a lot of organizations are seeing this. So if you're listening to this, test some of these indicators, because there is a very, very good chance. Yeah. Awesome stuff, Zach. Thank you so much for this. I had an incredible time on this one, and I think the listeners are really going to appreciate the insight and all of these kind of thoughts and ways to catch this that you gave them. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks again.
Wow. See what I mean about needing that notepad? Okay, so what are we going to do now? Well, now that you have a list of detection tactics and notes, consider how each of them may or may not be possible in your specific environment, and then get them in a threat hunting backlog of sorts, and then start those threat hunts. Each detection hypothesis will take a while to properly investigate, so prioritize all the options on how effective you expect them to be, and how quickly you can execute on verifying the evidence and get going. Make a list, pass them out to the team, whatever it takes, just get started. Let's kick off 2026 with a clean, defensible network. Before we close up, if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, I would appreciate if you could do the show a favor and share it with a friend or a coworker in the industry. Just shoot them a quick text with a link from your podcast player and tell them to check it out so they too can rid their networks and organizations of the fake IT worker threat. That's all. Thanks again so much for listening, and Happy New Year.